So let's say you have a old laptop that you think is otherwise pretty useless because you can no longer get into it, or maybe you think it's kind of infected with some kind of malware or virus. Most likely it's a Windows machine that's had it, and you don't want to necessarily get rid of it. You maybe want to look to kind of recycle it or upcycle it. Then installing Linux is a really good option, and it may well be a decent option at the moment. What with the COVID-19 outbreak, that if you're trying to kind of get hardware up and running so that you can homeschool your kids, which is a situation I find myself in, then given so much of what kids do at school is accessible these days in the cloud, then all you really need is a operating system that with internet access and a browser to be able to do quite a bit of that. And in that respect, running something like Linux is a really good option. So I quite like Linux Mint, and I'm going to show you how you can get that installed. So obviously working on a different laptop at the moment, so this is the one that I'm going to download it from, not necessarily the one that I want to install it onto. Go to linuxmint.com, go to the download section. The latest version of Linux Mint is 19.3, which has got the code name Trisha. Linux comes with a couple of different types of desktop. One of the desktops that is probably most popular within the Linux Mint distribution is the Cinnamon desktop, and that is one that I'm going to download. So I'm going to download the 64-bit edition. So this link here about authenticity, where it says don't forget to verify your ISO, this is really a bit of best practice that you should apply. What it's all about is that when you download a file from a website, you can run a check against that download to see if something called the checksum verifies, and that shows it's legitimate. To run that process, you need to have an application called SHA or SHA installed onto your laptop. On a Mac, that's something that you install via Homebrew. And assuming that you have got that installed, if you click on that link, it will give you all the instructions you need to run that verification to verify the authenticity of that download if you want to. Knowing how to do this is a good skill to have, but I'm not for now going to let it get in the way of this demo of getting Linux Mint installed as quickly as I can. So, back to downloading the Linux Mint software. You'll see there are a variety of locations you can download the file from. I'm going to download my file from here, which is a UK location. See that that's 1.9 gigabytes. It's going to take me a little while to download, so we will come back to that in a moment. So what I have here is a battered old Dell laptop. It runs some version of Windows. I have no idea how to get into it because I don't know the password. It's got a USB port on it, so I'm hoping that I will be able to copy my download to this key, stick it in here, and boot Linux Mint onto this from this, and then install it. So I now have that file downloaded into my downloads folder. So here it is here. It's an ISO file, which is a disk image file. So if I go back to the Linux Mint website, you'll see that there is a documentation link. If you click on that, and then you've got some English documentation there. So we've chosen the right edition. I've talked about how you can verify your ISO image if you want to, but like I say, that's a best practice element you might decide to skip, and you've now got to create what is called the bootable media. So this was going back to that little clip where you just saw me holding my old laptop and my USB stick in the other hand. This is creating the media from which the old laptop will boot. And bootable media is when a computer, basically when you turn a computer on, it looks for a drive in which to boot up the operating system. So that's the same for any computer. When you turn it on, it first looks at primarily its hard drive, and from there it boots either Windows or Mac OS, or even your phone does that when you turn it on as well, boots iOS or Android. And what we're doing is creating a new bootable media, and then we then have to tell our computer when we turn it on to boot up from that particular media as opposed to the hard drive. So that media being the USB stick onto which we are going to put the file that we've just downloaded. And the way that we're going to do that is by using a program called Balena Etcher. Balena is available on Mac OS, but you can also download it for Windows as well. And when you download that bit of software, and it's a free bit of software, this is what the application looks like. So you select the image that you want to create a bootable media of. So there is my image. I have got my USB stick plugged into my USB port, so you can see that here. And now I need to create the media by doing this process here called Flash. So if I click on that, that will then start to create that bootable media. So it just asks me for my password, which I'll add in here. So once that's created, you now need to plug it into the computer on which you want to install Linux Mint. And when you turn that computer on, you want it to look for that USB stick and boot from that, as opposed to booting from your hard drive. So to do that, you need to interrupt the boot sequence. Now the way that you do this is different on every computer. Quite often it's the it can be like the F12 key on a lot of computers, but the best way to do it is to maybe Google something like boot interrupt Dell Latitude. So this tells me that it's worth trying the F8 key by the looks of it. Maybe if that doesn't work, I will try the F12 key. And generally when I try that, I'll get a screen that comes up, which I'll show you shortly, which gives me some options of what I can do at that point that I boot. So we will move on to that next. So I'm now going to show you what happens when you put that USB stick into your computer and you've pressed the button that allows you to interrupt the boot sequence, and initially a screen is going to come up that gives you a few options, one of which is the install Linux Mint option. So the way that I'm going to demo that to you is by doing a virtual install. So this is exactly the same as installing it on your computer. I'm just showing it to you virtually here because that's the easiest way for me to make a video of it. So here's my boot screen. You'll see that it will automatically boot in 7 seconds. These are all the options, but I want to start Linux Mint, so I will let that start. This is the screen that you'd got when you plugged your USB stick in, you turned on your computer, you'd been hitting the F12 button, that was the screen that came up, and that was the option that you wanted to boot Linux Mint. So eventually you'll end up looking at this screen, which shows you what Linux Mint looks like, and this is basically a very, very basic version of the operating system running off that USB stick. But obviously you don't want it to run off that USB stick permanently. You want it to be installed onto the hard drive of your computer and for it to run off there. So we have to install it. And the way that we install it is by clicking on this little CD-ROM here. So it's kind of assuming that your CD or that your USB stick is a CD-ROM from which you'd install the software, very much like it was in the olden days. So I will double click on that, and that will start to take me through the process of installing it. So I want it in the English language, I want English UK. You can then select your keyboard type here, so for most of you you'll probably just set English UK there, but potentially if you're maybe installing this onto a onto an old Mac, you might set it up so that it's got a Mac keyboard layout, for example. So click continue. So install third-party graphics for software and Wi-Fi hardware, Flash, MP3 and other media. So yeah, you'll probably want to select that. Click continue. So I'm not interested in what was on the hard disk of that computer that I'm replacing, so I'm going to erase the disk completely and install Linux Mint on top of it. I'm not going to encrypt the new Linux Mint installation for security, or not this time round anyway. I have done setups of that before. Basically that just kind of encrypts every single file on your home drive. So yeah, that may well be something that you want to do, but if you're just sort of setting this up for something for the kids to play around with or to do some homework on, or you're just using it just to kind of learn a little bit yourself, then that's not worth doing. So you just want to probably have that radio button selected and then install now. That just gives you a warning that it's going to kind of trash what's on your disk. So where are you? In London. Well, I'm not, but there we go. Okay, so my name, so I'm just going to stick my name up there. It then creates a computer name. Obviously you can call that computer whatever you want. So you might name it, mine's obviously named after VirtualBox because this is the virtual machine that I'm running it on, but by default that will probably give you the name of your hardware, so it might say like Latitude or Dell or MacBook or whatever. I'm going to pick a username, choose my password. I can decide when I turn my computer on to log in automatically or require my password to log in, but I'm going to require my password to log in. I'm not going to encrypt my home folder. Click continue. And then it will just run through the install process. Now, obviously installing an operating system normally takes about sort of 45 minutes. Actually, this is considerably quicker than that, but I am going to fast forward it from here and then join you at the other end. So a quick glance at these install screens gives you a rough idea of the kind of things that you can do with Linux Mint. So yeah, you'll find just looking through those that most of what you would expect to be able to cover on a PC you can cover in exactly the same way with Linux as you can as on Windows and Mac OS. So when it restarts, it will tell me to remove the installation medium, so I need to pull out my USB stick and then I can hit enter. So eventually I'll get my login screen. So log in with my password. And that will open up the new operating system for me. So I'm not going to check my video drivers here because I think the reason that I'm getting that message is because I'm running this on a virtual machine. Here's my welcome screen. It's well worth you going through that to get to grips with it. I'm just going to skip this for now and close that. It's quite common for Linux to end up on old laptops that were otherwise looking pretty useless because they were running Windows, and Windows XP was an obvious example of that. So I think that Mint decided that they would base the Cinnamon desktop on Windows XP because that might make it easier for a lot of people moving over to it to use. So it's yeah, what you'd expect really. There's your menu bar, you've got your shutdown items and restart and everything where you would expect, and all of your groups. So you'll see that it comes by standard, it comes with Firefox installed. It also has Thunderbird, which is a mail package, installed as well. So you'll see that under internet. You've got Office tools, so these will save in a native Office format, but they will also save in and open Microsoft Word document and Excel files and PowerPoint files. So this is the equivalent of Excel, for example. This is the equivalent of Word, for example. So that's how you will do your Office files. But quite often you will be working maybe with cloud-based software. So if you're using Office 365 and you just want an additional machine that allows you to offer open Office 365 in a browser, then you may well not end up using any of this at all. And the same might apply for Google Drive if you're using Google Docs. One thing that possibly is useful to add onto this would therefore be Google Chrome, because if you use Google Chrome on any of your other machines and you have that set up under your profile, then you can do the same thing here, and then Google Chrome will sync with the Google Chrome that you use on any other laptops that you might have. So I will show you how to install that, and that process is the same for how you kind of install any software, and you'll find that you can install things like Zoom and Skype, and there are Twitter clients and so on and so forth. And yeah, you can just Google what your kind of Linux Mint option is for any of the kind of popular Windows software that you can use, or Mac software. You know, obviously it is slightly different, but what you will find is that this is a pretty good viable replacement for either of them. I've been running Linux Mint now since about October of 2019, and actually I felt comfortable enough to kind of take this into a couple of clients when I've been working out of their office, and use it as my primary laptop. And you know, it will kind of work with their networks, and it will kind of plug into their into their screens, into their kind of docking stations. You know, work with the mouses and keyboards. You know, it's a good option to have. And actually, one of the reasons I like it is because I've just got Linux Mint set up on a old computer, and that is my backup computer. So if for some reason my main computer is out of action or breaks, I've actually got something that I can use in an emergency if I need to. So in terms of installing new software, you would go to the software manager, and that's effectively almost like, you know, your kind of app store. I'm going to search for Chrome. And actually, Chrome in the open source world is called Chromium. It's pretty much the same thing, and you'll see that here. Install that. Just put in my password. So now that's installed, I can launch it. And then I can associate it with one of my profiles by just turning on sync there, at which point I'll log in with my Google username and password, and that will then sync with any other machines on which I'm using Google Chrome. Because I'm going to use Google Chrome all the time, I'm going to pin it to the panel so that it will always be there when I turn my computer on. And actually, because I'm not too bothered about having Firefox on there, I am going to unpin that from the panel. The only other thing I'm going to do before I finish this video is I'm just going to run the update manager. Now the update manager will run automatically every time you boot anyway, but it's well worth just running it yourself every now and again, just to make sure that your whole system is up to date. Obviously, when you have first installed from a bootable drive, obviously you've downloaded that at a point in time, so there will be a considerable amount of updates that need to be done when you first set up your computer, one of which will be updating the update manager, and that's what I'm going to do here. my password. It will ask me if I want to switch to a local mirror. If you remember right at the start when we started installing, or when we downloaded from a local UK site. This is really about just pulling your downloads from somewhere in the UK as opposed to maybe the default American server. You can change that if you want. To be honest, it doesn't really make much difference if you leave it as it is, but it will always ask you if you want to do that. So that is now giving me a list of all of the updates that I need to run, which I can just do by installing those. Oh, wrong password. So I hope you found that useful and that gives you the confidence to maybe take that old machine that's been sitting in your spare room for ages, that you always get fed up with when you turn it on because it takes a year to boot, or that you know that it's got a virus on it, or that you're just fed up with it. You know, you've got nothing to lose by giving this a go and seeing how you get on. So all the best of luck with it. Thank you for watching.